you actually need to do that about 6 months beforehand. If you don't want to be, caught in a very sticky situation of, I don't have a visa, I just have a VFS receipt, I'm trapped in South Africa, I don't know what to do.
We thought it best today to discuss the remote work visa. Today I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Manfred Barnard. I think it's a good topic for us to discuss reaching the mid-year point in South Africa, I mean across the world of course. But yeah, so Manfred, from your side, I think always a good place to start off with is just a recap on what the remote work visa is and why it was introduced.
Yeah, no. So I think one of the key things that this visa addresses is the desire, if I can put it that, of global professionals wanting to make South Africa their office. So the remote work visa, in a sense, is for your digital nomads, your freelancers, or expatriates who don't really need to work at a fixed office. They can make the world their office. And we have seen a significant increase of people wanting to make South Africa their destination of choice.
With regards to work visa options for South Africa, obviously there's a few which come to mind immediately. Critical skills work visa, general work visa, for example, they've been around for quite some time. How do they compare to that of the remote work visa? What is the key difference between them? And how exactly do you distinguish which visa type would be better suited for you?
No, so that's a fantastic question. So the key distinction between a critical skills visa, a general work visa, and a remote work visa. A critical skills and a general work visa requires that you have a local employer based in South Africa, whilst the remote work visa requires that your employer be based outside of the country. In terms of what it offers, a general work visa and critical skills is normally issued for a period of up to 5 years, and it does allow you to apply for South African permanent residency at present. However, the general work visa does also limit you in terms of when you can apply for permanent residency, being it needs to be after 5 years being in the country on this visa. When you take that back to a remote work visa, however, the visa is only issued for 3 years at a time, and it is not issued in terms of Section 19 like the critical skills or general work visa. It's issued in terms of Section 11(1)(b)(4). And that is always a bit of a curveball, I've noticed, for assignees, because they say, but I'm not applying for a visitor's visa, I'm applying for a work visa. And they are correct in saying that, but the prescribed requirements are stipulated in terms of Section 11(1)(b)(4), and the authorization to conduct remote work is mentioned specifically there.
So I know you mentioned permanent residency, right? Critical skills, general work, applicable, means long-term plans would work in those visa types. Now, remote work visa obviously doesn't offer that permanent residence route. I think the key question then is what happens when you approach that 36-month mark, the 3-year mark? Are you allowed to renew the visa in South Africa? Can you stay in South Africa beyond that? Do you have to return back home? How exactly does that work for anyone who might have a little bit longer term plans, but obviously now permanent residence is no longer an option?
So, interestingly, it's not what happens in month 36. Month 36, your visa has been expired.
Yeah.
What happens in month 33 is a lot more important. So, in South Africa, we have got the regulation stipulating that you must submit 60 days before the expiry of your current visa. And once you have a remote work visa, which must be applied for outside of South Africa, either in your country of origin, so the country for which you hold a passport for, or where you hold valid long-term residence. So let's say, for example, you have a visa for Papua New Guinea, you can submit your application there. Once you have a remote work visa and it is coming to its expiry date, you can apply within South Africa, but it is absolutely vital for you to apply before 60 days of the current expiry.
Okay. I think another question which comes up a lot for a lot of people who want to consider the remote work visa as an option is what happens to their family? Does it mean that they're only allowed to come in their individual capacity? Can they bring family with them? If they do bring family with them, what is the status their family comes on? If, for example, they have children, does that mean they can study in South Africa? Does it mean they can just visit either their father or mother whilst in South Africa? Alternatively, if they have a spouse, one of the key topics with regards to a spouse is that of work authorization for them as well. Are they allowed to work in South Africa? Are they allowed to obtain their own remote work visa in their own right? What exactly does it mean for those who do want to come as a family? Remote work visa is the option which has been identified for them, but now we need to consider the family and their affairs.
So, in terms of family, you have one of two choices when it comes to the children. They can either just accompany you. So, if they're not of school going age, they will just apply for long term visitors visas, also issued for 3 years at a time. However, if the intention is for them to go to school here in South Africa and it is at a registered learning institution, they can apply for what is called a study visa, and that will permit them to undertake their studies and continue to accompany you. When it comes to the spouse, it's a bit more interesting. So, if the spouse doesn't intend on working, it's very clear cut. They apply for an accompanying dependent visa. And I must note here, though, you must be in a legally recognized relationship. What I mean by that is there needs to be an official government document attesting to the relationship. This can either be in the form of a marriage certificate or a notarial agreement, for example. If the intention for them is to take up employment in South Africa, however, they will be required to apply for a work visa in their own right under the points based system or under a critical skills visa. Obviously, an assessment will be done before choosing that category. And if they intend on working remotely as well for an employer outside of South Africa, then they will need to apply for a remote work visa, provided that they earn the 650,000 Rand per year requirement.
Okay, so I think there's a very important point you just brought up, right? And I want to go back and touch on permanent residence again. If my spouse then decides, you know what, they do want to work in South Africa, not remote work, they've decided they got an offer of employment, they come to South Africa on a critical skills work visa, for example, which now allows them to actually apply for permanent residency, basically immediately. Then I am on a remote work visa, but my spouse is on a critical skills. Am I, as also a main member, but basically married to an individual who holds a critical skills visa, allowed to also apply for permanent residence with her or with him? Or does it mean because I actually hold a remote work visa, permanent residence is basically no longer an option at all for me, despite my spouse being on the correct visa type to go for a permanent residence application?
So it does allow you to apply for permanent residency to answer your question. A critical skills visa, for example, allows the main visa holder, so your spouse in this instance who holds a critical skills work visa, to apply for a permanent residence permit in terms of Section 27B of the Act. If you go and study the Act, you will see that it says it is for the main holder of the critical skills and his or her accompanying dependents. So when they say accompanying dependents, that refers normally to your spouse and your children. It does not apply retrospectively to, for example, a brother or your parents. So that's an important consideration. But to answer your question, if you're on a remote work visa and your spouse is applying for permanent residency, no need to worry. You can still apply as a family unit.
Okay, so I think long story short is basically that if your spouse is on the required work visa to transition to permanent residence, then it always will be an option for you. To go further than that, right? I think another key point which we always have to discuss, unfortunately, it's just one of the dark clouds surrounding immigration for South Africa is that of processing times, whether it be in South Africa or at the missions abroad. It's something which always does come up. So can you give us a little bit of an indication with regards to the remote work visa and its processing times, or maybe even just the landscape at the moment surrounding processing time for visa applications to South Africa, especially considering that we're dealing with digital nomads here who need to travel on a, I wouldn't say daily basis, but quite often, or maybe it's their desire to travel quite often. It's one of the key planning points for them to decide whether this type of visa would actually work for them because of the processing times itself.
So, in terms of the current landscape, first time applicants, like I said, they must apply outside of South Africa. You're looking at about 8 to 10 weeks from the date of submission. But I want to touch on a very important point you mentioned a bit before that is obviously they are digital nomads and they're very flexible. That is a good thing in terms of that they can set up shop anywhere, but it's also a bad thing because it means they travel frequently.
Yes.
And when you apply abroad, most of the embassies want to retain your passport for that full 8 to 10 weeks. So that means your travel has been restricted significantly. And with that, you have one of two options if they are available to you. The first one is requesting that the embassy please allow you to retain your passport during the adjudication process and that you will submit the passport afterward, closer to the finalization date. But this is at the sole discretion of the embassy. It's not a surefire thing. So that must be exercised with caution. The most practical route, however, if your country does allow for it, is to apply for a secondary passport. in order for you to continue to your travel for business engagements internationally whilst the application is processing. But yeah, it is such an important thing to plan your travel around your visa application, because for 8 to 10 weeks, you are pretty much grounded if you submit abroad. But when you submit in South Africa, the interesting thing is they do not retain your passport. You simply submit your biometrics, present the original passport on the day, and get issued with a VFS receipt to confirm you've submitted it. Once the application has been done I'm going to come to why there's such a big caveat. Once it's ready for collection, you can then simply present your passport on the day. They stick it into the passport at the accredited center, and you are on your way. You have your renewed visa. The problem, however, is the processing times in South Africa. Based on recent experience, we have noted that the Department of Home Affairs has made an active attempt in terms of reducing the processing times, but we have seen that they far often exceed about 3 to 4 months for the processing of remote work visa renewals. So that is why, even though Home Affairs says you need to apply 60 days before the expiry of the visa, the reality is you actually need to do that about 6 months beforehand if you don't want to be, caught in a very sticky situation of, I don't have a visa, I just have a VFS receipt, I'm trapped in South Africa, I don't know what to do.
Okay, you mentioning 6 months actually brings up something for me. Yeah, I think it's a scary taboo word in the immigration world, of that being tax and the South African Revenue Service, SARS, right? Unfortunately, this visa option being the remote work visa, it's one of the only visa options where it forms part of the requirements, so it's mentioned in the requirements. And for a lot of people, that might be a bit scary because they don't see it anywhere else. Can you, not going too in depth in with regards to the tech side of it, but can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of what it means in terms of SARS and the remote work visa, and what actually you need to do about, I would say, registering or undertaking, etc., with SARS for the remote work visa itself?
So one of the undertakings is, if you apply for a remote work visa, is that should the visa be issued for a period exceeding 6 months, and that you spend more than 183 days in the country, you will register with the South African Revenue Services as a taxpayer. Now, like you said, we focus mainly on immigration and not taxation, so please do contact a tax practitioner regarding this. But it's very important that you get registered as a non-resident taxpayer, as opposed to just a normal taxpayer, as the implications can be rather significant. And an item of note is that there are between 79 territories dual taxation agreements which you can utilize. But again, please consult a tax practitioner.
I think another key point we need to touch on is with regards to, we're dealing with digital nomads, we're dealing with people who want to work remotely. A lot of the time, these individuals aren't permanently employed by companies. A lot of them actually freelance out there, or they work on a contractual basis, where they be monthly contracts or every 6 months it changes, etc. Does this actually play a part in determining the remote work visa, how long it's issued for them, or exactly if they're actually entitled to apply for the remote work visa? Because if they don't have that contract, or a permanent contract whereby they can get the visa for the full duration, say 36 months, and they only have a contract for around 6 months, what exactly happens then, Lord?
Yeah, so it does make a difference. Like I said, this visa is issued for a period of up to 3 years at a time. If you were, for example, to submit an independent contractors agreement and it's only for a year and a half, they will only issue your visa for a year and a half, because the remainder is not guaranteed. It may say renewal, but it's not guaranteed. So that's the first item. The second item is that if you are employed by the company and you're permanently employed, chances are you'll get the full 3-year visa. You just need to make sure that in that contract of employment, it clearly stipulates the remuneration amount that you will receive, and that they issue supporting documents to confirm you are allowed to work in South Africa on a remote basis. And one of the interesting things that we have noticed, for example, in Switzerland, one of the undertakings that an employer must make is that the employee will reside in South Africa with a high speed and stable internet connection, which I find very interesting that Home Affairs is applying themselves that far. But then the most common question that I get is, as an independent person who works a part-time job, so you don't have a fixed employer, you don't have a fixed contract, you do freelance work, if I can put it like that. That is where it gets a bit tricky. Remember, one of the key requirements is that they can see you receive an income in excess of 650,000 Rand. Being a freelancer, that does not necessarily mean you will always get that income. It might come in gluts, and some months you far exceed that requirement, and in another month it's been quiet. So, with that, it's very important that you structure an application in such a way that you can clearly meet the criteria of the remuneration amount, but also submit a portfolio to say that whilst I don't have a single source of income from one single entity or people, I do have a trusted portfolio, and it is foreseeable in the next 3 years or so that I will continue to receive work and receive the minimum requirements. But again, it's all how you structure that application pack.
Last question to close us out for today, right? Digital nomads is obviously the reason they're actually in this position is because they love to travel. They love working or having the freedom to work from wherever in the world, whether it be in a home, on the beach, it doesn't matter. So, does that mean that once they actually obtain the remote work visa for South Africa specifically, they're limited in terms of duration? So, firstly, that if they have the visa for 3 years, it means they have to stay in South Africa for 3 years, or does it mean that they can enter freely within the 3 year period in and out of South Africa whenever they do want? Or alternatively, does it also mean that there is a specific time period for them to actually enter South Africa for which for them to actually get the remote work visa to be activated so that they can stay in South Africa for the full duration? How exactly does that work for them?
Great question. So it depends on where you got the visa. So, for example, in London, if you obtain the visa as a UK national, a visa is issued with what is called an enter on or before date. And the visa conditions normally stipulate to say that to take up remote work in the Republic of South Africa for a period of up to 3 years. And you normally have 3 years to enter the country because that's how they issue the visas. And from your first date of entry, the 3 years will be calculated. So, as a practical example, let's say you've entered the country on the 1st of August 2026, then your visa will be valid until the 31st of July 2029, meaning that you have 3 years to come in and out as much as you want to. Interestingly, though, unlike other countries, you can enter South Africa whenever you feel like it. So, the enter on or before date, if it says until 2029, you can only enter on 2028. And then your visa will be valid until, if you enter in 2028, 2031. So it's very interesting. But other embassies, such as the United States of America, for example, in Washington, they issue visas with a fixed expiry date. And then if you enter late, you will lose out on some of the validity. But if you enter on time, you'll get the full duration. And there's no minimum days spent in South Africa. So if you are absent from the Republic for like 2 years from your initial entry, your visa will still remain active. It's just you are missing out on the opportunity of working remotely for 2 years.
Thank you, Manfred. Always enjoy listening to your insights, and I'm sure the viewers out there agree. When it comes to the remote work visa, I'm hoping this at least provided them with a little bit of clarity, a little bit of guidance, especially for those out there who are considering this visa in the near future. And I think for today, that's it from us. Once again, my name is Aadil Wadee, joined today by Manfred Barnard, and thank you for watching